Hi everyone, I'm Bia, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who don't know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. Last week we talked about, we started chapter 3, which is in the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is, "In my Father's house there are many mansions." And so Jesus said this quote, and how the gospel works is it's getting these passages that Jesus brought to us and explaining them with more clarity in terms of Spiritism. So when Jesus said them, now people are interpreting them and people are a little confused. And so Spiritism comes to clarify these confusions that people have with Jesus' words. So we left off on section 9 of this chapter. "In my Father's house there are many mansions." So just so we can refresh our memories on the quote that Jesus said that John wrote down and brought to us, I'm going to read it again so we can go back to section 9 and understand how it's applying to Jesus' words. So it said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that where I am, you may also be." So, as we were talking last time, this kind of states how there is a spiritual world and how there's more out there, because he's saying, my Father's house, like God's house, right? There are many mansions, there's many places, showing us that it's not only earth. And there's gonna be a place for us after earth, after this corporeal existence. There's gonna be a place for us. And we'll be able to be where Jesus is. And we know that, of course, it depends on how evolved we are, but eventually, once we get to that point of evolution, we will be able to be at that place that Jesus is at. So, section 9. "In worlds that have reached a superior level, the moral and material state is very different from that which exists on earth. As everything, the form is always human, but it is more beautiful, more perfected, and above all else, purified. The body possesses nothing of the earthly materiality, and consequently is not subject to the same necessities, sicknesses, or deteriorations which the predominance of matter provokes. Due to the higher refinements, the senses are able to capture perceptions which the gross matter of this world obstructs. The specific lightness of body permits rapid and easy locomotion. Instead of dragging painfully over the ground, the body floats as if it were above the surface, or glides through the air with no effort apart from that of desire, just as the angels are depicted as doing, or as the manes on the Elysian fields. According to its wishes, mankind keeps the features of his past migrations, and shows himself to the friends as he knew him, except for the fact that he now radiates divine light, and is transfigured by interior impressions, which are always of an elevated nature. In places of counterness, discolored, and dejected by suffering and passion, life and intelligence now sparkle with splendor, which painters have shown through the halo or aureole of the saints. Very advanced spirits suffer only slight resistance to matter, thus allowing body development to be extremely rapid, making infancy short and almost non-existent. With the absence of worry and anguish, life is proportionally longer than on earth. In principle, longevity is in proportion to the degree of advancement in each world. Death in no way conveys any horror of decomposition. Far from causing terror, it is considered a happy transformation because there is no doubt as to the future. During life, the soul being no longer constricted by compacted matter, expands itself and delights in a lucidity that places it in an almost constant state of emancipation and allows completely free thought transmission. So here we're talking about the superior worlds. And on these superior worlds, we know they're more purified, they're more perfected. They might not be at exact perfection yet, but they're getting there, right? They're very close if they're in a superior world. Everything is more beautiful because they're saying that their senses are heightened because they don't have this very material body that we have. So we know that we're on this very material world and we have this very dense body that we use while we're on this world, while we're on Earth. But in these more superior worlds, they don't need this dense matter that's holding them back because they're more evolved. So instead, they have lighter, almost barely anything. And yes, they still show kind of the form of a human, but not in this heavy, dense matter that we have. They're light, like they say, they float, right? They're like floating across. They don't have to drag their feet on the floor like we do, right? Like picking up all this weight. They're just floating, they're light. And because of this, they don't have that much matter that's holding them down. Their senses are heightened, and that's why it's more beautiful, and things are, it's like sometimes they say, the spirits say, like, we can't even describe to you because you don't have the words to understand how beautiful and how beautiful these superior worlds are. And oftentimes, unlike us, they do know their past lives, and from their past they still work on it whatever they need to, and they make amends that that's how they used to be and how they progress, right, to move forward. And again, because they don't have this heavy material body, they're saying here that infancy is short. So it's not like they have all this time to develop and grow, and like we have, like to be an infant, to be a child, to grow into a teenager, to then be an adult. They have it very short and almost non-existent because their matter doesn't need all this time to develop. And also because they don't have these heavy, dense material bodies like us, they have longer lives because their bodies can handle it more, right? These corporeal bodies that we have can't handle life for that long. But their bodies can because it's not as material. And they don't have fear of death because they don't have any doubt of what's coming. They know already. They know what's coming. They know it's going to be okay, right, after death. They know that this isn't their only existence. So they don't even fear death. And they say it's even considered a happy transformation because they know there's going to be a future. They know it's not it. So no one's fearing death. So as we see that these superior worlds are much different from how we live today, but that's what we're striving to get to. And this is why Jesus says that there are many mansions, because there are less evolved worlds, there are medium evolved worlds, there are superior worlds, perfect worlds. So there's these different levels. So that's what he means by the different mansions, right? And it's showing us that there's more to life than just this one corporeal body that we have right now. And then we get on to section 10 of this chapter. In these blissful worlds, relationships between people and individuals are always friendly, never perturbed by ambition to enslave their neighbor or make war. There are neither masters nor slaves, and none privileged by birth, only moral and intellectual superiority, which establishes all conditions and ultimately gives supremacy. Authority receives and deserves the respect of everyone, as it is only given to those who merit it, and is therefore always exercised with justice. Man does not try to elevate himself above another, but only above himself by striving for perfection. His objective is to ascend to the category of pure spirit. This desire is never a torment, but rather a noble ambition that induces him to study ardently and in order to become an equal. In these worlds, all the delicate and elevated sentiment of human nature finds themselves exalted and purified. Hate is unknown. as are petty jealousies and the covetous of envy. The ties of love and brotherhood bind all humanity together, so that the strong help the weak through a greater or lesser degree of intelligence. Man acquires possessions of a small or larger quantity. However, nobody suffers from want, and no one needs to make atonements. In short, evil does not exist in these worlds. So again, we're talking about these superior worlds and how we know that, like they're saying, evil doesn't exist. People aren't trying to compete with one another. They're not trying to fight with one another. They're not jealous of someone else. They're only striving to be the best that they can be. They're saying, okay, this is where I am, and yeah, those people are more involved. I don't want to beat them, but I want to help improve myself so that I can also be at that level. And there's no evils, right? And like they're saying, in justice, like who has the power supreme, who's making laws or something like that, is people who deserve it. And because they're more evolved worlds, they're just. So it's the people who deserve it, and they're being fair, they're being just within these within this supremacy. So it's like the ideal society that we could think of right now. That's how these superior worlds, that's how they really live. That's what's really happening there. So we can only imagine a world where hate is unknown and everyone is tied together with love and brotherhood, and everyone helps one another, right? The strong help the weak. Everyone's just striving to be their best. That's what we could hope for on this planet, but that's what they're truly living for, living and doing in superior worlds. And in short, evil does not exist in those worlds, which is really crazy to think about, because imagine how many bad things happen here on Earth, and imagine none of that happens in these superior worlds. Section 11. Evil is still needed in your world in order to make known goodness. Night in order to be able to admire light. Sickness so as to be able to appreciate health. In those other worlds, there is no need for these contrasts. Eternal light, eternal beauty, eternal serenity of the soul offers a proportional eternal happiness, free from the perturbations caused by the anguish of material life and the contact with evil creatures who finds no access to these realms. These are the things that cause the human spirit most difficulty in understanding. Mankind has been sufficiently ingenious as to paint the torments of hell, but could never imagine the glories of heaven. Why not? Because being inferior, only pain and misery have been known, and as yet the celestial brightness has never been seen, so one cannot speak of that which is unknown. However, while humanity is raising itself up and cleansing its soul, horizons are expanding, and mankind begins to compare the goodness that is in front of it, as well as the badness that is behind it. So, here again, they're comparing now our world to the superior worlds. And on our worlds, we need evil, because then we know the difference between evil and good. If everything was just good, you wouldn't even know what evil was. And we're not at that point that we can comprehend that. So they're saying evil is needed to show us what goodness is, right? The right thing to do. Night is needed to show us the light, right? So we have this comparison. We need sickness to be able to appreciate being healthy. So in our world, we're still very, simple-minded, right? Kind of to think of it like that. Like, we need night to be able to appreciate and admire that there's light. If it was always light out, we would take it for granted. But in the winter, when it gets darker for longer, we long for that light, right? So it's that same kind of thing. Because we appreciate the light, because we know what it's like to not have the light. But in the other worlds, they don't need this contrast. So they have eternal light. They have eternal beauty and serenity, because they are at the point that they understand that they are blessed to have that, and they appreciate what they have. And they're saying that on Earth, we always, humans have always depicted a horrible image of hell with all these torments and sufferings and all these things. But heaven, no one really draws much except like a light and God and angels. And that's because we're closer to being inferior, right? So we can understand these evils and these this inferiority. We can understand it, and that's why we can depict it in these pictures, right? Interpret it into these pictures of what people interpret to be hell. Meanwhile, heaven, we have not been able to experience what heaven or these superior worlds are like. So we can't even imagine. So that's why we have less descriptions, less pictures of, less paintings of what heaven would be like, because we can't even begin to imagine that, because we haven't been able to experience that. But the evils and the pain and the misery, that's what we have experienced. That's where we are, because we haven't evolved as much as we hope we did. Section 12. Meanwhile, the happy worlds are not specifically privileged orbs, as God is not partial to any one of his children. To each one he gives the same rights and the same opportunities wherein to reach these worlds. Each one start at the same point, and gives no one more than another. Even the highest categories are accessible to all. It only depends upon the individual to conquer their place by means of work, so reaching it more quickly, or remaining inactive for centuries and centuries in the quagmire of humanity. And it's saying here that this, in parentheses, is saying this is a summary of the teachings from all the superior spirits. So summing it up, they say that not everyone is privileged. Don't think that the superior worlds have special privileges or are like the favorite child. No, God gives everyone on all worlds the same rights and the same opportunities on their world. And he makes everyone start at the same starting point, right? No one has a head start, and we're all equals. Those spirits that are on the superior worlds, they just have evolved already, and they just have worked on themselves. So instead of being jealous of those spirits who are on those evolved worlds, we just have to work on bettering ourselves so that we may also get to those places. Those higher worlds are accessible to all. We just have to work to get ourselves there, to do the best that we can to reach that level of worlds that we want to be in, right? Because that's what we're striving for. We're striving to be perfect. We need to work to perfect ourselves and evolve and do good so that we can get there. And now we're going into the next big section in chapter 3, which is worlds of tests and atonements. So while we were just talking a lot about the superior worlds, now we're going on to the worlds of tests and atonements. Section 13. What more is there to say about worlds of atonements that you don't already know, since you have only to look at the one in which you live? The great number of superior intelligence amongst its inhabitants indicates that the earth is not a primitive world, destined to receive beings that have been recently left by the hand of the Creator. The innate qualities that they bring with them constitutes a proof of their having already lived and achieved a certain degree of progress. But the number of vices to which they are subjected also shows the great moral imperfections. This is why God has placed them in an ungrateful world, in which they can make atonement through heavy work and the suffering of the miseries of life, until they deserve to ascend to happier planets. So here it's saying how we know that Earth is kind of a balance. We know we're not a primitive world, because there are spirits here, there are spirits incarnated here who do great things, right? There's intelligent beings who come here and even to help us evolve, and great intelligent beings who are doing kindness, who are inventing things for us, starting charities, all these things. So we know that there are these beings that are more intelligent. So we know this isn't a primitive world. But then you can look at all the vices that exist on this world and all the imperfections that we have, the moral imperfections. And that shows us that we still have a lot of tests and atonements to go through, because we go through a lot of trials and a lot of things to make up for, a lot of sufferings that we have to go through. So that's why we can see that Earth is one of these worlds of test and atonement. Section 14. Nevertheless, not all the spirits that incarnate on Earth came to atone. The races that are called savage were formed from spirits who had only just left their infancy, and who found themselves, as it were, on an educated course for development through contact with more advanced spirits. Later came the semi-civilized races, made up of the same spirits as they traveled along their path to progress. In general, these are the indigenous races on Earth, who will raise themselves little by little through the centuries, some of whom have already managed to reach an intelligent state equal to the more enlightened. So then we're talking about how on Earth there are very primitive civilizations, right, that we see, and indigenous tribes and stuff that we see. They're very primitive, and these are the spirits who have recently just come from a primitive world, but now they're moving up to our world so that they can start developing further, even though they're still right in that transition of getting out of that primitive state. But being in a world with people who are a little bit more evolved helps them to also evolve and to progress. And the same way as how there's people who are very intelligent that come to help us, show us the way, to help us progress. So it's the same way for those primitive races and groups that we have that exist on Earth. The spirits who are in atonement are, if we must use terms, the exotic ones of the Earth. They have already lived on other worlds where they were excluded for persisting in wickedness, or for having been the cause of perturbation to the good people in those worlds. They therefore had to be exiled for a time to an ambient of more backward spirits, so receiving the mission of helping them to advance, as they bring with them the more developed intelligence and the germ of the knowledge they have acquired. This then is how spirits under punishment are found among the most intelligent races, and why the misfortune of life seems so very bitter for them. This is because they have a higher degree of sensitivity, and so are more highly tested by contraries and sorrows than the primitive races of those moral sense is still obtuse. So there are those primitive ones that are just starting to learn and to grow a little bit more, to evolve a little bit more. But there's those spirits who have been to other planets, but they were, while that planet was doing good, or that world was doing good, the community was doing good, they were bringing that wickedness. They were bringing some evil. They were doing bad things. Instead of helping, they were kind of hurting that community. And in which case, they were kind of banned. They were exiled from their world, from their planet. And then they came to a world like Earth, so that they have, yes, they are still wicked and they have this evil in them, but they were on that more intelligent planet. So they are intelligent, right? They are getting intelligent, but they're just using their intelligence in the wrong way. So they come and they bring this knowledge to us, and they help our society of these more primitive people develop further, but sometimes they're still using this this evilness or this wickedness. And what they have to do, their atonement is they're making up for their wrongs that they did. And so they have to come to a less evolved world and kind of deal with less evolved people to understand and to kind of be punished and to try to improve themselves so that they can go back to being on higher worlds and not stay on Earth. 15. Consequently, the Earth offers an example of a world of atonement, and although their variety is infinite, they all have one thing in common. They all serve as places for exile for those spirits who rebelled against the law of God. This means that these spirits have at one and the same time to fight against the perseverity of man and the inclemency of nature, which is doubly arduous, but which will develop the qualities of heart and intelligence simultaneously. God then, in all his goodness, allows punishment to become something that will benefit the spirit. St. Augustine, Paris, 1862. So, they're saying here how Earth is one of these worlds of atonement. And although there's many, many worlds of atonement, and you can't say they're all the same, one thing they have in common is saying that they're all a place of exile for these spirits who are rebelling against laws of God. So we know, and we can get more into it, how Earth started with these spirits who were exiled from a world, right? Because they were not evolving as quick as those other people. They were not doing the good that they had to do to stay in that world. So they were exiled to come to Earth to help Earth evolve, because the people on Earth were more primitive than they were. But recently, and we'll get into this next week more, is that Earth has started to move away from this world of tests and atonements and kind of move up in the ranks. So we're going to talk about that more next week. So that's where we'll leave off this week. And next week we'll start off talking about the regenerating worlds and how worlds progress. But before we leave off today, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone for today's date, June 4th. This one's titled Excellence. The secret of joy in work is contained in one word, excellence. To know how to do something well is to enjoy it. It doesn't matter what the work is. Cleaning windows, delivering the mail, or designing rockets. We can find joy in any kind of work if we focus on the quality of our work. On the other hand, we're not likely to find joy in work that we do sloppy or ineptly. We may not be excellent at everything we do, but we should always strive for excellence. And when we do, we may surprise ourselves at how much enjoyment we can take in even the most mundane tasks. I do many things well, some of them more significantly than others, but I can enjoy any task if I focus on doing it well. If at all you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to email me at cardiacradyforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.